This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
Captain Jeffrey Digman was a Marines Marine with a bright future. But then Jeffrey Digman was found dead in his bedroom, a bullet to the head. The police ruled suicide. His family says it was murder. Barbara Ann Ratner and Barbara Ann Smith met in 1958 when they were just teenagers. They soon became the best of friends. Years later, the two Barbaras discovered a mysterious secret in their past and learned that they shared much more than their first names. In Florida, nearly 30 churches have been hit by suspicious fires in only 16 months. Authorities feel a deranged arsonist may be at work. Also tonight, we celebrate a remarkable milestone. Recently, calls from our viewers resulted in our 100th case solved. Thanks to you, law enforcement has closed cases that were deemed virtually unsolvable, and the families of missing persons have been joyously reunited with their lost loved ones. Join me for this special presentation. You may be able to help solve a mystery. Adopted children, the search for a natural parent can last a lifetime. In this unusual story, two women named Barbara are both looking for their mother. Remarkably, the two Barbaras are longtime best friends who discovered as adults that they had far more in common than they could have ever imagined. Barbara Smith grew up in Los Angeles, California in the 1940s. When she was 5 years old, Barbara had one of those unfortunate childhood experiences which would forever change her life.
Anyway, and your own mother didn't want you. That's why she gave you up. My mother told me so.
I just started to run home and I just burst out into tears. That's when it rang clear to me that it could be used in a very vicious, hurtful way. Someone had given me up, even though I had known the security and love of my own family. It was a time of, well, what happened? What really did happen? And I guess it was the first of the real feelings of what it meant to be adopted.
Barbara was born in July of 1940. She remembers being told by her parents, Jack and Rose Smith, that she had been adopted. It never bothered her until the day her best friend began to ridicule her.
Sweetheart, remember how I told you that the doctor's gonna come over?
That evening, Barbara was inconsolable. Her parents asked the family doctor, Maurice Silton, to stop by and speak with her.
How are you?
Dr. Silton came into my room and he sat down and he told me the whole story.
Barbara, I'm the doctor who delivered you. Your real birth dad, he died during the Second World War, and your birth mother, she died right after giving birth to you.
I don't believe it.
Well, why don't you get a good night's sleep and...
So that started at that point. My father to come in the room after the doctor left, and he talked with me and said, well, I hope you're feeling better, and, you know, calming me down, and saying, Barbara, you know that everybody is gone.
I know that my family's still alive, and you know that too, Daddy.
And he just sort of left it. He didn't continue, he didn't say any more, just left it at that.
Finally, when Barbara was a teenager, her father brought out her long-buried adoption papers. For the first time, Barbara Smith learned that her real mother's name was Victoria Bumgarner.
There was no indication there that she had ever died in childbirth, as I had been told. And I remember seeing my mother's signature on the paper, and I just stared at it and stared at it and stared at it. It was the only thing that I knew that she was in existence. And it sort of, at that point, resurged in myself saying, I know that they're out there. I don't know who or what, but something is out there.
A couple of years passed. In 1957, Barbara met a young man named Steve Reed. They soon fell in love and eventually became engaged.
Hey, come on in.
One afternoon, Steve and Barbara visited a friend of Steve's named Hy Ratner. Barbara was startled by a portrait hanging in the living room.
Wow, that portrait looks almost like me.
Yeah, that's my sister Barb. Remember I told you how much you guys looked alike?
Oh, that's right. You did mention that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're gonna meet
I looked at that portrait and I thought, well, he's right. She does resemble me. How interesting.
Everybody's upstairs
Then
now.
we assembled into the dining room,
Hey, listen, you guys
and
want
Barbara came in and we briefly were introduced and said hello.
some- You sure? Yeah.
Steve!
Barbara!
Hi!
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Okay, I'd like you to meet my fiance, Barbara.
Hi.
And I thought, she does look, you know, like me, and just kind of thought that to myself.
Friends for the movies.
We met, and it was just instant-like. You know how sometimes you meet somebody and you feel like you've known them for a long time?
The two Barbaras soon became the best of friends. They even married two men who were also best friends. The young couples were inseparable.
Our friendship developed almost instantly. We really became very close. We shared a lot of our life's events. Having children, we raised our children together to the point that Barbara was Aunt Barbara and I was Aunt Barbara for her children. Barbara never knew that she was adopted, and I had been told that she was adopted. So it was a thing that I knew, never talk about it, but I talked about it from my point of view later on. I told her that I was adopted in the name of my mother. And what I knew, she just asked a couple of questions and that was it. And nothing more was ever thought about it until her mother passed away.
In 1966, Barbara Ratner's mother died, and her father decided to sell the family home. While helping to pack, Barbara uncovered a box filled with mementos from her childhood. Barbara Ratner was shocked to discover that she had been adopted. Amazingly, the adoption papers listed her natural mother's last name as Bumgarner, the same last name as Barbara Smith's natural mother.
I was dumbfounded. I didn't know that I was adopted, but I didn't connect it with Barbara at that moment. It was a few minutes later when I started reading the correspondence, and there was one paragraph where they were describing the mother as being a healthy woman, already having one previous child, a daughter, living in Beverly Hills that was in very good health. I just knew it was Barbara. I just knew.
Barbara Ratner immediately called her best friend, Barbara Smith.
Hi, Barbara.
What was your natural mother's name again?
Victoria Bumgarner.
And I said, well, you're not going to believe this. I said, I just found some papers, and I am baby girl Bumgarner. And there was a long pause, and then she said, I'll get back to you, and hung up.
Barbara Smith called her adoptive parents. Her father agreed to call Dr. Silton. He confirmed that Barbara Smith and Barbara Ratner were indeed sisters.
It was just the most wonderful thing to me. I mean, your best friend is your sister, and that couldn't be more wonderful. I mean, we were already Auntie Barbara, and I remember running into her children at one point and said, but I'm really Auntie Barbara, but I'm really Auntie Barbara. And they looked at me and thought, what is she talking about?
The two Barbaras were overjoyed. In 1969, they approached Dr. Silton with questions about their natural mother. He provided them with a few details, but withheld most of the information. Before his death in 1989, Dr. Silton destroyed all records pertaining to their adoptions.
We really appreciate
He was reluctant because he was very close to my parents. He just wanted to let sleeping dogs lie, as it were.
It's the best thing that we can do under the circumstances.
This was just not something that you could conduct with finesse. And to be close to the family and to do all of the arrangements and the things that went on in both of our cases, I mean, it just must have left him devastated because by law you were to protect the mother. She was his patient. So where does that leave us with very little information?
Barbara Smith and Barbara Ratner then contacted the Children's Home Society of California. A sketchy history of their past began to emerge. In 1940, an unmarried 23-year-old woman named Victoria Bumgarner arrived in Los Angeles. She was pregnant and turned to Dr. Maurice Silton for help.
Having any discomfort?
On July 31st, a baby girl was born. She was adopted by Jack and Rose Smith, who named her Barbara Ann.
I'm sorry, Victoria. It's time to take the baby back to the nursery now.
15 months later, Victoria gave birth to a second daughter. Again, Dr. Silton made arrangements for adoption. In an absolutely mind-boggling coincidence, the two young sisters grew up just 5 miles apart. Each was named Barbara Ann, and each was raised by an adoptive mother named Rose.
As we started to compare some of the facts and the dates, it was just a lot of similarities. Even some of our outfits as children were similar. I mean, I don't think a lot of twins have as much similarities as we do. And the fact that we married best friends, and the fact that we are best friends, you know, it's just a real, that just goes on. I mean.
Barbara Ann Smith and Barbara Ann Ratner found each other against almost inconceivable odds. They have little information on Victoria Bumgarner, but bolstered by their own experience, they are convinced that if they keep looking, they will someday find their natural mother. Next, the death of a Marine captain is shrouded in controversy. Was it suicide or murder? From the time he was 10 years old, Jeffrey Digman wanted to be a Marine. He signed up while he was still in college and was accepted into officers' candidate school.
Jeffrey was very even-tempered. He spoke very softly, very quietly. He was a very clean type of individual. Everything had to be just perfect. He was just a very organized individual who knew what he wanted and directed all of his efforts and attention at achieving that.
Because he was such an athletic kid, he thought it was very macho to be a Marine, and I think that's why he chose the Marines. He thought he could do it, and he could.
At the age of 28, Jeffrey Digman was promoted to captain and stationed in his hometown of San Diego. In late June of 1988, he and another officer pooled their money and bought a house together. Just 4 months later, on November 1st, 1988, Digman was transferred to Puerto Rico. According to friends, Digman was unhappy about the transfer, but by Christmas he had begun to settle in and was dating Lucy Garcia, an accountant at the base.
Thank you.
Jeffrey was a very quiet person. He was so serious, and I liked that of him. He said he was gonna take 2 weeks off to go back home and fix some things, work in his income tax papers, and do some other things over there.
Just after the holidays, Digman spent 2 weeks at his home in San Diego. He was scheduled to fly back to Puerto Rico on January 22nd, 1989, Super Bowl Sunday. At halftime, a neighbor saw Digman return home. Digman's roommate, a major in the Marine Corps, had gone to Las Vegas for the weekend with his girlfriend. At 6 p.m., neighbors heard what they thought was a car backfiring. At 10 p.m., the Major returned from Las Vegas. He was surprised to see Jeffrey Digman's car still there. Digman's flight to Puerto Rico had been scheduled to depart 15 minutes earlier.
When the roommate returned home with his girlfriend, they noticed that the house appeared to have someone in it. The lights were on, the garage door was open apparently. So this caused some concern, some suspicion, as Mr. Digman was not supposed to be there. The roommate and the girlfriend, again thinking that something was out of the ordinary, went across the street to get some neighbors.
Hi, Bill. I'm sorry to bother you. I was wondering if you could come over and help me out over at the house and just take a look inside with me.
What do you need? What's the matter?
Well, I'm not sure, but if you could come over.
The Major persuaded his neighbor to go into the house with him.
All right. Did you notice anything strange around here?
No, it looks normal, natural.
Jeff's car wasn't supposed to be here, and the lights were supposed to be off. I don't know, but I appreciate you coming over.
That's okay.
I'll check in here.
Jeffrey Digman was dead, with a single bullet wound to his right temple. Digman's blood alcohol level measured an incredible .24, exactly 3 times the legal limit for intoxication. The death was ruled a suicide.
Among the items that lead us to conclude that it is a suicide were talking to his acquaintances as going to possibly his state of mind before this occurred, as well as forensic evidence that was discovered at the scene. One of the pieces of forensic evidence was what we call a gunshot residue test, and that determined that there was gunpowder or an indication that Mr. Digman had fired a gun on the right hand.
I had no time ever believed that he committed suicide. I never believed that from when I first got the phone call to when I went down that night, or in the past 2 years have I ever believed that he committed suicide. I've always believed that he was murdered, and that's what the evidence shows, that he was murdered.
The Naval Investigative Service backed up the coroner's ruling of suicide. Unconvinced, Bill and Donna Digman hired several experts and began their own investigation, which not only took on a life of its own, but soon took over their lives as well. For more than a year, the Digmans, working out of their home, collected information about their son's case. Upstairs in his childhood bedroom, they painstakingly duplicated the scene of Jeffrey's death, using the actual furniture from his house. With the help of a private investigator, Bill Digman demonstrated for us why he believes his son could not possibly have killed himself.
In this room, we've recreated a mock-up of the crime scene. Everything is located in the same position it was that night, and it was determined by our investigator, Ted Gunderson.
The first thing I had to do was determine the trajectory of the bullet, which I did. And this is the trajectory of the bullet on that occasion. Also, it was important that we recreate the bedroom as nearly as possible, and we did that by measuring the furniture and using the exact furniture that was in the room that night, the night of the shooting.
This was the position that my son was found in, and I am the same height as my son. Now, he was shot through the head, and for him to have been able to have shot through the head, he had to be shot somewhere along the bullet path here, which means that you have to get lined up with it, and to do that, I have to get in this contorted position, like this. The other thing was that he was left-handed. And if he'd held the gun in his hand and in this contorted position, over on the side of the bed, as soon as he was shot, he would have fallen to the floor.
Even though Jeffrey Digman was left-handed, investigators found powder burns on his right hand as well. Bill and Donna Digman believe there was other evidence inconsistent with suicide. A trail of blood ran from Jeffrey Digman's left ear down his cheek. This raised the possibility that Digman was in an upright position for at least 7 seconds after the gunshot wound was inflicted. Police photographs taken at the scene also revealed an abrasion on Digman's cheek and a contusion on his elbow. Above Jeffrey's head on the turned-back sheet was an unexplained smear of blood. His parents hired Steve Schleby, an independent forensic expert, to review the case.
I don't feel that Jeffrey killed himself. I think there was some kind of a struggle that took place and he was shot during that struggle based upon an evaluation of the evidence at the scene.
10 months after Jeffrey Digman's death, his parents requested that his body be exhumed and a second autopsy performed, with their observers present. The Naval Hospital in San Diego performed a second autopsy. They found 2 injuries not mentioned in the first autopsy report: contusions on Jeffrey Digman's right elbow and on the middle finger of his left hand. The second autopsy report, however, stated that these injuries were insignificant. There was no medical evidence to support a conclusion of homicide. The Digmans continued to believe that their son had been murdered. They felt Jeffrey's death was somehow related to his tenure with the San Diego Marine Drug Testing Unit. For 7 months in 1988, before he was transferred to Puerto Rico, Jeffrey Digman had served as chief of the unit.
People were dealing drugs. People were testing positive. He would write his reports documenting what the results of his investigation were. And those people weren't being disciplined. They were not being discharged. And he was very upset over that.
Jeffrey's mother recalls that while he was with the drug unit, she visited him at his house in the very room where he would later die.
And I found some military documents in his safe, and I asked him what were those documents. And that was when he told me that he was saving those tests from drug abuse tests so that he could cover himself in case anyone said that he wasn't doing his job. When we came back to move Jeffrey's things, we wanted to empty the desk to make it lighter. And we opened the hinged door that the safe was usually behind. And the hinged door came off in our hands, and the hinges were not connected. And the safe was not there.
They were after those papers. We didn't get the safe back because I believe that they pried it open, broke it. Couldn't very well give it back to us if it would have been damaged, or possibly it had blood on it.
There is a final puzzling postscript to this case. When Lucy Garcia helped the Marines pack Jeffrey Digman's belongings in Puerto Rico, one of the items was a small greenback diary.
They opened the book, and they start reading it. They close the book again, and then they give it to the person who was packing. When I give the green book to one of the enlisted, I noticed that all the pages were in the book. Everything was fine.
Eventually, we unpacked things and looked for the little green book that Lucy was telling us about. And when we found it, what we found was that the pages were cut out of it.
It's been difficult, thinking about it all the time with the mock-up there, so close. Yeah. A constant reminder that he's dead. But I have a job to do. And some people may say that we're enthusiastic or obsessed with this. Yeah, we're obsessed with the fact we want to know why our son is dead. We want to know why. And we're not going to give up until we find out why.
2 months ago, the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology reviewed both autopsy reports. They changed the cause of death to undetermined. Although the Naval Investigative Service and the Riverside County, California Sheriff's Department stand by their original suicide ruling, they would welcome any new evidence pertinent to the case. Next, authorities in Florida need your help to solve a wave of arson on tonight's Special Alert. On October 24th, 1991, firefighters rushed to the First Baptist Church in Ocala, Florida. Despite their efforts, the 85-year-old landmark was completely gutted. Incredibly, this was the 21st suspicious church fire in Florida during a 15-month period. Authorities began to fear that they might be dealing with a pathological serial arsonist. The series of blazes began in July of 1990 in Jackson County, Florida. By February of 1991, 11 churches had been torched. By June, the total stood at 15. Then suddenly, the fires mysteriously stopped. For 3.5 months, all was quiet. But in October, the reign of destruction erupted again. 7 more churches in as many days went up in flames. Among them, the First Baptist Church in Ocala, Florida. Damage from this fire alone is estimated in excess of $4 million. After the rash of fires in October, authorities formed a special joint task force comprised of federal, state, and local investigators.
Task force is looking at all possible patterns and avenues, everything from profiles of possible fire setters to times of day and other information regarding the churches, but there certainly is no specific pattern that has been determined at this point.
Just 5 hours before our camera crew arrived in Gainesville to film interviews, the Westwood Hills Church of God was destroyed by an arson fire. At daybreak, church members looked on as a task force searched the rubble for clues.
Churches like ours like to stay open and offer people a place to meditate or pray and be involved 24 hours a day. And it's got to the place now to where we can't leave our doors open so someone could come in and pray. You know, we're having to guard the church.
I would hope that we will come to some sort of quick solution. However, I think it should be noted that we need to be prepared for the long haul. These are very complex investigations.
To date, more than 26 churches have been damaged or destroyed by the arson fires, resulting in a combined property loss in excess of $8 million. But for the congregations, the devastation cannot be measured in dollars and cents.
These are very important places for us, very important structures. They house memories, good feelings, and they're a very vital part of our community. So the loss is heavy for all of us.
Fortunately, no one has been killed or seriously injured in any of the blazes. Currently, there are rewards totaling $46,000 in this case. Teresa and Paul Stamper of Kingfisher, Oklahoma, were married in 1982. Paul was a successful local businessman. At the time, Teresa had no idea that Paul was also a convicted felon with a violent criminal past.
I know you were with someone now. I want to know who you were with, and I want to know it now!
Within 6 months, Teresa's marriage to Paul became a living nightmare. He accused her of being unfaithful and would often erupt in violent and uncontrollable rages.
You shut up!
He was jealous.
And you had better be here when I get back.
I mean, we could be sitting at a red light, and I could just turn and look at someone, and it could be a guy sitting in this car, and he would just double his fist up and just hit me right in the mouth.
Finally, after 2 years of nearly constant emotional and physical abuse, Teresa found the courage to leave her husband. For the next 6 months, Paul Stamper stalked Teresa night and day, waiting to seek his revenge. On November 23, 1985, Teresa and a friend, Chris Butler, were heading home after an evening out. They were pulled over by what they assumed was a highway patrol.
Teresa, honey, you get out of the car. Come, hey.
No!
Chris had come too, and he had yelled, "Don't leave me here," you know. "Teresa, don't leave me here." You know, and there wasn't anything I could do.
Chris Butler survived the attack. Paul Stamper drove north, holding Teresa at gunpoint. After 2 days, she managed to escape. Paul Stamper was arrested at a bus station in Salina, Kansas. But just 6 months later, he broke out of jail and disappeared. Update. Just minutes after this story aired, the FBI received information from several of our viewers that Paul Stamper was living in Commerce City, a suburb of Denver, Colorado.
One phone call was very specific. It had his alias, it had his location, his address, his employment, that he was driving a semi-truck overland, and that brought an immediate response from the Denver FBI so that we moved out within the hour.
Just 3 hours after our broadcast, Paul Stamper was arrested as he left his home. The fugitive had been living in the Denver area under the assumed name Gary Wickle for approximately 4 years.
This is one of the more efficient, cost-effective, speedy apprehensions that we've ever made. For us to not have any idea early evening that this individual is in the Denver area, and by 11:30 he is captured, he's off the streets, and he's on his way to Denver City Jail. That, I think, may be close to a record for us.
Paul Stamper was returned to Oklahoma and is currently being held in the Kingfisher County Jail while awaiting trial on charges of kidnapping and attempted murder. If convicted, Stamper could receive life in prison. The haunting desert of the American Southwest. Immense, desolate, nearly uninhabitable. Visited by only the most durable of men and women who, for one reason or another, find safety in its solitude. Vast horizons where one can be alone and unobserved, where secrets can be hidden amidst the sand, sage, and chaparral. (1933), just north of Farmington, New Mexico. That summer, a daredevil barnstorming pilot named Red Mosier made several mysterious flights into the desert. There he was met by a Mexican millionaire named Leon Trabuco. 19 years later, the secrets of the enigmatic and elusive Trabuco would begin to unravel. In 1952, a federal grand jury was convened after investigations by the United States Treasury Department and the Secret Service. It was alleged that Leon Trabuco and 4 other financiers had engaged in a sinister plot to buy up much of Mexico's gold reserves and resell it in the United States. It was a brazen scheme conceived at the height of the Great Depression and born from a conspiracy of greed. By the spring of 1933, Trabuco and his associates were convinced that the United States would soon devalue the dollar and that gold prices would skyrocket. But the potential for enormous profits carried great risk. Their gold had to be smuggled into the United States. If caught, the conspirators faced long prison terms. At a makeshift foundry in Puebla, Mexico, gold in every imaginable form was melted down and cast into ingots. In less than 3 months, the conspirators had allegedly amassed an incredible 16 tons of solid gold.
So, Mr. Trabuco, this is the property I was telling you about. Lots of space to store stuff.
Leon Trabuco traveled to the United States in search of a safe hiding place for the illegal treasure. After several unsuccessful trips, he decided it would be wiser to bury the gold.
It's too big. I need something a little more secluded.
Secluded?
Legend has it that Trabuco chose a sparsely populated region in the northwest corner of New Mexico. The area is near the Ute and Navajo Indian reservations, just north of the small town of Farmington. Red Mosher allegedly made a total of 16 flights, carrying an average payload of 1 ton per trip. After each delivery, the gold was loaded into a pickup truck and transported to an unknown location. Oddly, Leon Trabuco never made a map of that location, nor did he reveal the burial place to his co-conspirators. Records indicate that the final shipment was delivered on July 14, 1933. Just 6.5 months later, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 became law. The price of gold soared. The conspirators had made an overnight profit of $7 million. However, the group elected not to sell the gold, but to wait, confident that the price would continue to rise. Blinded by greed, not one of them was aware of an executive order related to the Gold Act. It declared that private ownership of gold within U.S. borders after January 17, 1934 would be punishable by steep fines and imprisonment. The group had waited too long.
Well, when FDR put the gold embargo, that takes gold off of the market.
Ed Foster grew up in Farmington, New Mexico, and has spent more than 35 years researching the legend of Leon Trabuco's treasure.
Gold. It's illegal, and so consequently, these 5 men from financiers from Mexico City, they had 20 ton of junk. It was not worth a dime because they couldn't sell it for anything.
Within 5 years, 3 of the conspirators met with untimely deaths. Leon Trabuco spent the next 2 decades traveling the world in a vain attempt to sell the illegal treasure. In 1952, he tried to cut a covert deal with U.S. government officials, prompting the grand jury investigation. Trabuco was never indicted. He died several years later, apparently taking to his grave the secret location of the gold. Ed Foster has scoured the desert terrain surrounding Farmington and is convinced that he has found the landing strip used by Red Mosher in 1933. It is a 7-mile-long plateau known as Conger Mesa.
I believe that Conger Mesa is where the plane would adjust and come in and land. I met this Indian lady that couldn't speak English, so I got an interpreter. She said she had watched that plane land there many, many times.
Ed interviewed another Navajo woman who was 6 years old in 1933. She remembered several Mexican men who lived on the reservation.
This would be very unusual for a Mexican to move out here. For a Spanish or a white man to move out here and live would be unheard of.
20 miles west of Conger Mesa, near an abandoned Navajo home, stands a building unlike any other on the reservation. Ed believes that it was constructed by the men Leon Trabuco left behind to guard the gold.
This house has windows, a front door and a back door, and it had a veranda. To me, this house would look good in Tijuana, Mexico, but not on the Navajo reservation.
28 miles east of the Mexican-style home, Ed uncovered an intriguing clue etched in the face of a stone outcropping he calls Shrine Rock. Ed believes that it's the key that will ultimately lead him to Trabuco's treasure, buried in 1933.
This is 1933, 16 T-O-N.
Ed Foster feels certain that the gold is buried somewhere within this triangle formed by Conger Mesa, Shrine Rock, and the Mexican-style home. Ed contacted internationally renowned treasure hunter Norm Scott to conduct a detailed survey of the area.
I get an awful lot of stories coming to us after 30 years in the business, and probably about 80 or 90% of them you have to chalk up to some fictional writer as writing a book or magazine, but this one has a ring of authenticity to it, and therefore it deserves attention, and we intend to give it to it.
I have looked with my eyes and metal detectors for many years, and now they have technology, and that's why I think it's going to be found with technology. It's not going to be found with dumb luck, because I've spent all of that.
Is Ed Foster merely chasing a legend which has grown grander with the passing of the years? Or does the desert of New Mexico indeed hold the secret to Leon Trabuco's long-lost fortune? On our next Unsolved Mysteries, in 1978, a charming, sophisticated man befriended a wealthy widow in Tennessee. Before long, he was running her estate and her affairs. 7 years later, he allegedly faked his own death and vanished, leaving the widow virtually penniless. Join me next week for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries.